Is this a re-article?
I know. So it was underarm.
All right, folks. Good evening. This is the Committee of the Whole meeting for August 15th, 2017 for the City of Rolling Meadows. Before we begin the meeting, the hardest part of this evening is to speak about a dear friend and colleague who passed away on Sunday night, the alderman from the 2nd Ward, Jerry Hill. Just an amazing gentleman who his entire life gave to the City of Rolling Meadows. All I can say is that in the time that I got to know him, he was a true gentleman who really loved the city, the citizens, and the staff. And I would ask everyone now to please rise and for a moment of silence in tribute to Alderman Hill. Please be seated. Mr. Comstock, would you begin with the CIP, please?
Obviously, the first item that we have for the Committee of the Whole tonight is the CIP. It is really a snapshot. It shows you long-range planning. It shows you additional steps that the city and staff are actually moving on. It is not a budget. Obviously, you'll be seeing the budget in your packet for the August 22nd City Council meeting, and then obviously for the September 19th Committee of the Whole, we will actually start the discussion with the 2019 budget. So with that, we actually have a presentation that Finance Director Melissa Gallagher will be presenting a quick PowerPoint regarding the CIP. There is no action on this process. It's just a pure informational discussion item.
Thank you, Mr. Crumstock. City Council, we have in the packet, we have the CIP for years 2018 through 2022. And we also included within that the budget planning calendar for the budget process for 2018. Before we start, I wanted to say a special thank you to our Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee. We have Alderman John Diastis, Alderman Tim Beanbas, Bob Loesch, and we have Steve Hollish in the audience, Jack Eleutherio, and Public Works Director Fred Vogt, and myself. And we really want to say a special thank you to all their time on the committee. So with that, I'm going to go through a brief PowerPoint presentation as Mr. Crumstock had mentioned. The CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan, is really just a financial planning tool as far as a snapshot in time. It does address, for 5 years, all the capital needs throughout the city, and it is a financial planning tool. As mentioned, our Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee really spent a long time reviewing, and we'll get to their recommendations shortly. The city discussed the budget parameters at the May Committee of the Whole meeting this year, and a lot of the budget parameters, of course, are in the proposed budget and the CIP. It is updated every year, and it is something that is a working document here at the city, and staff uses it. But not every single project in the CIP makes it into the proposed budget. We will be reviewing the funds, and I'll go through those in just a few minutes. So several focuses through the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee, and we'll get to that in a minute, really were a couple things. Local road fund, making sure that we're reviewing the projects and revenues. Although that's not the specific charter of the Capital Improvements Committee that was touched on, but we were looking at projects. Just as another overview item, chargebacks are not at their full funding status, but we are making progress. A couple years ago, we did add an equipment chargeback that wasn't previously there so that we were able to start a plan for funding equipment purchases. We've always had one for vehicles. So beginning in 2017, our Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee met all the way from January to July. We actually added a few meetings this year from January, February, and March. We actually focused on the utility rate, a study that Baxter and Woodman performed for us for the city. That rate study was something that we not only reviewed, we looked at the projects, and I will footnote here that we have an update to that that we'll be proposing soon to City Council. But we met every Thursday throughout the months here, and we really appreciate their work. I'm going to review the recommendations that are made from the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee with the City Council here. It is in your packet itself. There were 7 this year. We've done that for the last 5 years now, just to make sure that after the work is done, the Capital Improvements Committee does then reflect back and provide you some recommendations. One of the first recommendations, and they are in priority order here, was to recommend to the City Council that determining the annual street program and determining the annual street program expense, while the Ad Hoc Capital Improvement, this is their recommendation of $1.8 million annually, but it is also coupled with reviewing the available funding. Now, that is not per se staff's recommendation at the $1.8 million. If you recall, the last couple of years, we were at about a $500,000 annual street program, and now went up to about $1 million, then ended up to $1.8 million. But it is something that the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee is recommending, and staff agrees that we should have a recommended amount. As in past years, also to continue to follow the annual street program planning calendar. Back from 2015 to 2016, I think it's worked well. As Public Works Director Fred Vogt and Assistant Director Rob Horn has mentioned, it really helps to start planning for all of those needs, and we'll be working on that. Parts of that have already been taken care of in the summer months, but then again in September, the September 19th Committee of the Whole meeting, there'll be discussion on that as well. The next one was to evaluate shovel-ready projects. So determining what projects that might be ones for debt issuance. The Capital Committee wanted to request that the city to begin those projects and to really look at the long-term strategy of funding with debt. And that ironically is on the agenda as well tonight, and we'll go into that. One of the things that came out of our discussions as well was, again, using the CIP as a working and planning document throughout the year, and not just in the month of August and shelve it for later, but actually pull it out and kind of look at it and earmark it and see how we're going to use it going forward. This type of document is very relevant when we do go out to the market for debt issuance. It's very relevant when we go through our audit even, and it's very relevant for credit rating analysts. The next item here was to then also keep in mind that when we did the independent road evaluation by Christopher Burke this year, is to use that as a working document as well. And already that has been started to be incorporated for the annual street program, making sure that we're looking at those road street conditions. The next item here was the Baxter and Woodman utility rate study. That was a very important study that was completed in 2015. Now that it's just a little bit into the future, we need to update that now, and we'll be bringing back a brief proposal with Baxter and Woodman to provide an update that. Why that's important is that a lot of those pieces will help us with evaluating how to look at the rate structure. Are there things that we need to be doing differently within the utility rate fund, and in making sure that our rates are consistently smooth over time. And then lastly, we wanted to just as making sure that it doesn't fall off our blueprint is to make sure that we're keeping track of our needed maintenance for our infrastructure, and then also making sure things like the Public Works building on Central, we don't overlook that, and we did make sure we put that on our recommendations. So I'm going to just kind of move forward here, but those are the recommendations to City Council, and they are in the CIP. For outstanding debt service, we do like to bring this chart back. It is familiar to City Council, I'm sure. In 2017, obviously, a lot of our debt does mature. Our longest debt, our bond, goes out to 2023, and that is paid by the general fund. And we're actually going to go into this a little bit more in depth in the next presentation. So as a snapshot, again, this is in the CIP document, proposed capital projects for 2018. Roughly $9.5 million are proposed across all funds, with the largest expenditure for the street program, sidewalks, and annual street maintenance. And that's about a third of the entire capital program at roughly $3.2 million. As we prepare the budget document itself, as I mentioned, not all projects in their final form can go into the document. There are some cuts and changes that the city manager does make along the way, and myself as well. But that gives you a high-level overview of all the capital projects, and the amount is similar from last year as well. So we're going to start with the funds as an overview. It is a 300-page document, so I don't expect that you follow along with the CIP, so that's why we're doing the PowerPoint. The general fund obviously is our largest operating fund for the city. It does not pay for capital expenditures directly. It does do transfers, of course, and chargebacks, but that's not we do not account for our assets in the general fund. But the general fund does account for economic development activities, and to that end, a few individuals on the City Council, the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee, and staff have expressed an interest in updating the city's comprehensive plan. The last time it was done was in 2005, so it's about 12 years old, and it's just something to think about. We are proposing that in the 2018 budget, and as an estimate right now, it's $60,000. Of course, that dollar amount can change. As another side note for the general fund does not pay for police department vehicles, or the general fund does pay for police department vehicles. The vehicle equipment and replacement fund will show those vehicles, but they're actually paid from the general fund. So I just want to make sure that's footnoted there. There are 4 police department vehicles proposed this year, as well as mobile fleet software. And that is expensed in the general fund, but we do show that in the capital plan. And you will see each capital page with a description of each vehicle. The next fund is the 911 fund, and what we're going to do with all these sheets is just show you as an estimate where we end as an estimate for 2017, revenues all in for the year for 2018, and expenditures estimated all in for the year. And then we do an estimated fund balance for 2018. So again, this is a forecast based on what we know now. And for the 911 fund, the biggest expenditure that happens this year for 2018, of course, is the Northwest Central Dispatch. The CAD system there, we're going to be spending money with Northwest Central Dispatch. We've been obviously letting City Council know about that. And then we're also, we've been planning for that. The 2018 proposed budget, I wanted to mention that within the packet itself, we will get to this shortly with the tax levy, but there was a reallocation based on this year's tax levy proposal for the 2018 budget. Currently, the amount for the tax levy for 911 is $601,500, and we're proposing an additional $50,000, so that we're making sure that we're adhering to our fund balance policy now that we have one in the 911 fund, and to make sure that we have enough funds going forward for capital purchases in that fund. And the only other item for 911 is the outdoor warning siren for 2018. Vehicle and equipment replacement fund, moving on to that fund. Again, all in, estimated fund balance, a little under $1 million based on about $2.3 million worth of expenditures of vehicles and equipment. One of the largest items would be for that fund, and we're not going to go line by line, but of course we have 2 big purchases for fire department vehicles, in particular the fire engine, more discussion and review from the Vehicle Replacement Committee. And then we also have the citywide software ERP planned process, and it's phase 1 or year 1 of 2. And all of those are detailed within the body of your CIP. We just put this as a slide for you. The building and land fund, about 50% of this fund, as far as expenditures, go to capital, but then we also have operating expenditures as well, and some supply items and contractual services. All in, estimated fund balance is about $320,000. Again, chargebacks are not at full funding status, but we're making some slight incremental change as we can with this fund. We should footnote here that the fire stations and the old public works building repairs are not included within the proposed budget, but we do keep showing that in the CIP for future reference. These are proposed projects, and while these are not, these are shown right here, and they have been discussed by the Ad Hoc Capital Improvement Committee, these are ones that will be discussed in thorough by the City Council. We're just proposing these right now. The Utilities Fund. Again, this is one fund that we are continually to evaluate. Obviously, our charges for services for water, stormwater, sewer, and refuse, water, stormwater, and sewer are the main fees that go to this fund. We obviously have a large capital outlay, but our Jawa water supply service, obviously, at about a third of that, it supports this fund for expenditures. We are taking a look at this with utility rate study and making sure that we're looking at all the options out there, and more work will happen with the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee. This fund does a lot of capital, as you can see, $3.1 million for capital expenditures. Not all projects will, of course, make it into the proposed budget, but again, we're listing them here as making sure that we are showing the full picture. And again, not to highlight it too much, but the Baxter and Woodman study is a very important piece to all of this. The state motor fuel tax, and we'll kind of go into this in a little bit when we hit local roads in the next farther down in the agenda, but the state motor fuel tax fund, it's where we have the state motor fuel tax funds received from the state of Illinois. It's per capita, so we roughly receive about $600,000 a year. And this year there's going to be a bit of a change in that, where we used to transfer the funds out of that fund to the local road fund. This year, based on an audit for 2013, we are now going to be just keeping the funds in the fund, no transfers out. And that was one of the audit recommendations from the state of Illinois after Department of Transportation, state of Illinois did their audit. So what they would prefer is that we keep the money in that fund, which would mean that we don't transfer money out. We're proposing $600,000 worth of resurfacing for the annual street program in that fund. And then we are going to take the snow removal supplies, street light items, and other signal marking items and bring that over to the local road fund so that that fund pays for those items. So that's just a little bit of a change out of that fund. The local road fund, there's a big revenue pie as far as the makeup. It is a diverse revenue base. All in, about $2.6 million coming into the fund as proposed for the local road fund, with a large portion of property taxes, and we'll get into that shortly. And then expenditures at about $4.2 million. Now this fund is obviously negative spend at this point, and it's something that we need, of course, more direction and guidance, but we're bringing this forward just right now as a starting point for discussion. The Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee really spent a long time discussing and reviewing and kind of seeing how things are flowing in terms of projects and seeing what prioritization. They also talked about, well, it wasn't their charter, trying to find out what else we can do for revenues. Funding is primarily provided by the home rule motor fuel tax at 4 cents per gallon. The road and bridge tax, which is a county tax, it's not a levy from the city, and vehicle stickers, but then we also have a very large item for property tax levy where we didn't have one before. So currently, $550,000 is the current property tax levy for the local road fund, and the reallocated draft property tax levy we are requesting as a proposal to increase that from $550,000 up to $350,000, or from an additional $350,000 up to $900,000 to bring more money into the road fund. And we're going to go through that, but I did want to highlight that for this point. Again, about $3.2 million worth of proposed capital projects. Between the two funds, the state motor fuel tax and the local road fund, we're looking at, as mentioned before, a $1.8 million program. And there are also other items that are capital in there. And we also have operating as well in the local road fund. So it's just a snapshot, just a summary. We want to make sure we give you a high level because there's a lot to go through with the CIP. This is one of the steps during the budget process. We are going to be presenting the proposed budget, or at least releasing it in the August 22nd council packet. And I'll turn over to Mr. Krumstock for final comments.
Like we said, there really isn't too much discussion on this. This is a presentation discussion, and obviously, as we said, the first budget discussion will be obviously the September 19th Committee of the Whole. So with that, that's all that staff had on number 1.
That's fine. Any comments? Because there's no direction from council whatsoever, just comments for the presentation. Seeing none, let's go forward to understanding bonds.
Number 2 is something that we've done a long time ago, so we're bringing it back to understand bonds, especially because it looks like we will be going out for bonds shortly. But the biggest point is, and I'll get up there to change the PowerPoint as Finance Director Melissa Gallagher start, and we do have a quick PowerPoint on this too, is understanding how municipal bonds are sold, what they actually do, review our bonds. But at the end of this discussion PowerPoint, we really only have one discussion for the City Council, and that needs some action from all of you. And overall, we want Council to approve that you would allow staff to contact and work with the city's financial advisor to develop scenarios. What happens if we do a bond issuance, how long it would be, what would terms be. But that's all that we're really looking for. We're looking for that straw vote that allows staff to go out to the city's financial advisors to work on scenarios. From those scenarios, we would come back to a future committee of the whole to give the council a better snapshot of what we're looking at. So with that, I turn it over. I will walk quickly and change the PowerPoint. So at this point in time, I do turn it back over for the PowerPoint for Finance Director Melissa Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Krumstock. So Barry kicked it off with an overview, and we're going to walk through, a lot of this is in the council packet already. I did provide an additional handout as well from the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, the MSRB. That is one area that's sort of an arm of the SEC. We upload our audit annually. We provide all our debt disclosures through them. They are an oversight for debt issuance and for municipalities. So I included a handout there. I also have an outstanding debt service in the packet. As we have mentioned, what we're trying to do is really just set the stage for scenarios. And obviously, tonight's discussion really isn't about terms, estimates of repayment, types, methods, calls, premiums. We wanted to kind of set a stage as far as how we're heading down the road. Staff is reviewing a possible issuance of for fire stations, approximately about $9 million for fire stations, $3 to $5 million for roadway improvements, $3 to $5 million for utility improvements. Obviously, these are just numbers right now and estimates in terms of from staff's perspective. This is not the City Council's perspective in terms of these dollar amounts per se, but in some discussions there have been. So we use this as a very big starting point. So where we wanted to start was reviewing where the city's outstanding debt service sits currently. And with that, just as a reminder, and we continually do this with our financial advisor, is to see what we can do to refinance, typical to a mortgage if you're refinancing for better rates. In 2012, the city did finance a series of bonds, and now they're known as 2012, although we still designate them by their original bond, for a savings of about $750,000. As a reminder, the 2004 bond is paid from the general fund. That is from general fund revenues, and we transfer that over to the debt service fund. In 2013, we did a refinance as well to save the city about $65,000. And as a reminder, and I know people have heard this before, but 2 bonds are still in the property tax levy. One matures in 17 and one in 18. And this really is the starting point for understanding bonds. And whenever you're looking at where you're jumping off from here, any credit rating analyst would be doing this with us, and this is a really great basis to do this. Why we put this up here is to kind of show you where those bonds were and what they were for. Road improvements, Myerstown Mall and Meyer debris development, water improvements, the recycling carts, there were TIF, redevelopment, stormwater. So very common things that we have done before for general obligation bonds and things that we're looking at now. So why issue debt? Well, typically for municipalities, you issue debt for capital items and infrastructure. These are high dollar ticket items that are going to be amortized over 10, 20, 30 years. And they have long-term useful lives that your community is going to be using them. And so the residents and businesses who live here and use the community services, they're going to pay for those infrastructure payments over time, and bonds are typically issued for these types of capital projects. And of course, there are lots of different terms. We say bonds, usually debt, but when we talk about it, we're saying general obligation bonds, and those are the ones that are issued by a state or local government and backed by the full faith and credit of the taxing power of the city. And that means that we're going to pay the interest back, and so they're very secure to the bondholder. Usually general obligation bonds are paid from general revenues such as utility taxes, sales tax, local taxes, property tax. Primarily property tax in a lot of instances, but there are lots of other varieties. We don't talk about revenue bonds typically. Historically, City of Rolling Meadows just has issued general obligation bonds, but revenue bonds would be from some sort of specific project that help fund the bonds. So municipal bonds and general obligation bonds are typically used interchangeably. They are considered debt securities by the government to the bondholders, and governments pay interest on the debt over the duration of the bond. Obviously, they're tax exempt from federal and state and local taxes for the most part. We say for the most part, but that is typical. Municipal bonds are similar to the home mortgage in the process that you're going through to take out a home mortgage. What we have to say is that, obviously there's going to be some steps along the way, and we'll show you some of the differences between a home mortgage versus issuing debt. But typically, you're going to gather all your information about your finances. You're going to go through the pre-approval process. You're going to select a lender, and at the end of the day, you're going to go through the entire process. And similar to the home mortgage, you're going to pay the principal and debt over time. So how do bonds work? Well, municipalities who issue bonds receive a cash payment at the time of the issuance. And this is where we're trying to set the stage where at this point in time, we're not saying it might be 6 months, a year. We're not saying premiums. We're not saying 10, 20, 30. What we're saying right now is to give you some information so that you understand that at this time we're not looking for feedback on that, but we want to run scenarios. And this is just a promise to repay the bondholders and investors the interest in principal. So city staff will basically develop the terms with the financial advisor, and there is a whole team of advisors along the way, and we'll get into that, and we outline that in the packet as well. And there are lots of variables that we'll go through a debt issuance. You can start your payments from anywhere from 6 months to a year or longer. It just depends on what you're going to do for your framework. There are level payments. There are things that you might graduate over time. When we did our debt refinancing for the 2012 bond, we did a little bit of both. In terms of gradually bringing things to a level playing field in terms of the general fund. There are also different ways to look at certain revenue streams. How do you want to look at your utilities fund? Do you want your utility capital projects be paid out partly from user fees and maybe partly from a property tax? Again, those are things that we'll look at as we're structuring and gathering scenarios for the City Council. Municipal bonds right now, the rates are actually much lower than they were when we went out to issue in 2007. Of course, it's based on current market conditions, our city's credit rating, which we'll touch on in a few minutes, and also our city's duration that we'll choose. And there are lots of different variables there. It also depends on how you're going to pay with what type of revenue source and the timing of bond and other factors. Again, there's a lot of variables and moving parts. Right now, we're looking at about 2.7 to 3.8%, factoring in all the city's credit rating and analyst information that we have right now. Just as a frame of reference, the rates before about 4.2 to 4.5% when we last issued debt. There's some other considerations that we talk about. We talk about making sure that we have projects that are shovel-ready, some things that are done ahead of time, such as engineering on the public works side, to make sure that we've got projects ready to go. We also want to make sure that the term infrastructure, which we've talked about before, is in the bond framework and in the documents. And then something that we've talked about before, which is arbitrage. It's something that you will monitor throughout the term of your bond as your bond proceeds come in. And just as an example that we have in the packet, just remember that it's tax-exempt financing. And so that means that if you borrow at 3 and your investment returns 3.2%, which is rather high at this point in time, but if it is, and yet 2.2%, the 20 basis points, you're going to actually have to return to the U.S. Treasury. So it's not an immediate consideration. However, it is part of what the Bond Council will monitor. It's part of the financials advisor's role and the underwriter's role as well. There are IRS penalties, and it's just something that we do keep in mind as we look at it. So how are bonds issued? When we went through the last refinance, which was 2012 and 2013, we actually had to do a mini official statement, a mini audit, a mini pro forma. And there are lots of pieces along the way. We mentioned that we actually have to usually like to time it with our audit, because otherwise you actually have to go through almost an entire audit. So we try to time it with the audit best as possible. But there are lots of professionals that are involved. You have a whole financing team at your disposal. We have bond counsel, we have our own city attorney, we have our city officials, our city staff, our financial advisor, our city auditors, our underwriter, our credit rating agencies are actually a tool of reference as well. There are many other factors and variables as well, but in terms of the specific legal documentation, there's bond ordinances, there's a tax-exempt legal opinion, and other items that are reviewed by our team. Financial and cash flow estimates, so not just out to 5 years, sometimes out to the 10, 20, and 30 marks. And then we actually draft an official statement, which is a pretty big document that will bring through all the city's financials and economic indicators. We have a lot of building permit data that we pull through. And this is the document that the underwriter takes and actually brings to potential buyers of bonds. The city's audit will be used through the credit rating analysis, and the city's audit is used throughout the whole process. So again, timing it with the audit is beneficial, but it's something you can work around if it isn't. So the city's credit rating, and I think the city council is very proud of this, and the city staff is very proud of this as well. We've really made a lot of progress over the last 10 years. Right now, for S&P, we're at a AA plus, from an A plus, and that is one level just below the highest level. So they had listed a whole bunch of reasons back in December a couple years ago, but really it's a lot of strong budgetary performance, a lot of budget flexibility, stronger cash flow and reserves, and fund balance policies. In 2014, Moody's also upgraded the city's credit rating, and now we're at an AA3, and that's just 3 levels from the top level. So that really helps us along the way. When you sit down with the credit rating team, you're rated on a whole list of items, and a lot of those things deal with, again, the audit, but a lot of it is city cash flow, cash balances, fund reserves, budgets, audits, revenue and expenditure estimates, your pro forma out, your debt outstanding is a component, but it's not the primary component. They're looking at other things. They're looking at your other pieces of debt, maybe your pension obligations, the status of your collective bargaining agreements, your economic indicators, your home rule status is a big component, and then other items. It is a full picture, and they do have a rating criteria, and not one item is really weighs heavily more than others. I thought this was a really good chart. Again, it's kind of busy up there, but it is in the council packet. It is sort of a funny one in some ways because it looks like a monopoly chart, but it's Municipal Market 101, and it is from the MSRB, the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board. As I mentioned, that is an arm of the SEC, and it will show you the path. I had a little judgment that it didn't show enough on the city council side of what your decision process was, but I left that in the council packet for you to look at. I'm not going to walk through that because what I decided was city manager and I talked about it's really 3 areas, and that chart is good, but 3 areas here that really for bond phases, determining your infrastructure, as we mentioned, shovel-ready projects, and we're doing this now. We're reviewing our existing debt and doing some pro forma going out, and requesting that City Council approve it to initiate the phase. And the next, as I mentioned, there are 3-prong here, looking at financing terms and service providers. And that really is the work of your financial team. financial advisor and your underwriter. And then looking at prospective information with your bond counsel and your underwriter, and then bringing back all of the scenarios to the city council for review. The last part, of course, is when all those decisions have been made and all the ordinances have been signed, your sale of bonds occur, and that's when a lot of different pieces start to come together in terms of the official statement and all the documents that need to be prepared. Bond counsel starts to prepare all those legal documents and the ordinances, and then, of course, the underwriter is part of this process as well. There are lots of new regulations that have taken place over the last couple of years, and at that point, the city does make the sale, and there are lots of continuing disclosures over time. This is just a very quick and overview. There's a lot of pieces along the way, but what we wanted to do, and we have this information in the packet as well, so you can go back to it, but really for tonight, we're looking at City Council direction to really initiate the process, to talk with our financial advisor, to start bringing scenarios in terms of all those pieces that we talked about in tonight's discussion. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Melissa. Very nice job. Thank you, staff, for going through this process. I'm sure sometimes it's like watching paint dry when you have to put all the numbers together. I only have a couple of questions, because tonight the only question before the council is just to move forward for the advisor. What's the time frame for that process, approximately? I know you can't give me it, but approximately.
Typically, when we're going at, if we're allowed to talk to our advisor, we're looking at 2 to 3 months because of the number of scenarios that we want him to run, and also evaluate everything, and especially because September is going to be starting the budget, we don't want to bring anything back too premature.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions from an information point? Sorry. Mr. Cannon, sorry.
Thank you. Just a quick thought. Obviously, we identified some areas that we all know we need bonding in. I guess the other one that I would really like to see us consider, and I'm not saying we have to do it, but I think we really need to make a financial commitment to do something with Public Works South. We've been just putting it off year after year, and we all know it's a bad situation down there.
And that's also a reason why when we talk about $9 million for this, 3 to 5, when we talk about the scenarios, we'll also throw that in. But the biggest point is when we get ready for any bond, the word infrastructure needs to be in there. And obviously, it's very important because then if you have some savings from one section, then you can put it into something else. But without that being specific, and using the words infrastructure allows us to utilize it for other items or make up other items as we continue working through any payments.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else have another information? Then staff just needs us to go forward. We need a straw vote to give them the authority to go talk to our advisors. Can I have a show of hands to go forward? That's everyone on the council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was it for PowerPoints.
Okay, I'm just looking for a little more. Okay, I guess, Barry, you're up again.
So the next one, obviously, Finance Director Melissa Gallagher will stay behind me, and also if we need additional help, obviously Public Works Director Fred Vogt will be here. But this is a continuation that actually the next two are continuations from our last cow. So the first one that we have is the 2018 Refuse Fund. This is obviously the working draft that we have. It continues the discussion that we had about putting in chipper service for 2018. It would be one time during the fall-ish. It would be allowing us to evaluate for 2018 how utilize the services, what the numbers could be. So again, it is a test, but it's also put into the budget approximately $40,000. Part of the discussion that we also have in the proposed budget is also a slight increase in the refuse fund, which is not increased in numerous years. But again, this is all part of the discussion. It would take it from $29.95 to $32.50 per month. And again, that is a slight increase for the overall refuse, if you want to call it, at that point in time. So what we actually talk about in the scenarios, what we were asked about a 30 cents per month refuse rate, if that was 1%. But again, staying within our fund balance, we feel comfortable increasing it slightly. But again, what ifs? We were asked about that. If 600 residents were going to be used at 900, 1,200. But again, we felt for the 2018 budget, we would put back in the service, we would evaluate it, we would monitor it, and we would be back at the city council at this point in time. And again, we only have a few questions regarding this, but it is with the inclusion of the estimate, approximately $40,000 to do this one time for 2018. Do you feel comfortable? Does council still feel comfortable with this slight increase that we've talked about? And then does the city council wish to review any other rate increase that we would talk about at a later date? So with that, I also turn that over to Finance Director Melissa Gallagher, but that was my quick summary.
Thank you, Mr. Crumstock. I think you pretty well covered that. I think just as I mentioned before, we did a what-if analysis, sort of a sensitivity analysis on page 2 of the document, so you could see if, in terms of the percentages of use. We don't have that data right now, but it is something that is mentioned, perhaps using this as a pilot or a one-year project to see and gather the data, and then have City Council reassess to see if it's warranted to continue. Again, the cost is a 30-cent increase to the rate for an annual cost of $3.60 per home. And I think that's the best summary there. And so I'll turn it back over to you.
So basically, we're going to have two questions to discuss tonight. First is what they gave us on the front page of doing just approximately start out with $360 per year increase for the residents. And the second question, does the city council wish to review other rate increase scenarios as presented in the rate packet?
And there is one other one. It's the first one, which is the inclusion of the service for 1 year.
Yeah. Thank you. So I will open it up for discussion, comments. Mr. Cannon.
Thank you, sir. I think everybody sitting at the table understands how I feel about the chipper service. I would like to see that removed, and I think that would negate the need to have a rate increase. I guess there's two other line items in the refuge fund that I'd like to see eliminated, and the one is $1,200 for our Big Belly program. That's kind of, we don't use the way it was originally intended. I think there was great intentions to begin with, but I think it's money that we don't need to spend. It's not a lot of money, but it's $1,200. And there's also Big Belly software, I think, that goes with that program for $400. I'd like to see both of those eliminated.
Anything else? Other points of discussion? Yes, Mr. Banger.
Thank you. I agree with Alderman Cannon. I'm not interested in the addition of the chipping service. And if we don't have that, I don't see the need to increase the garbage fee. From the pages, we'll still wind up within our fund balance policy we'll be at 33 and our floor is 30. So I'm fine with the status quo in those regards. I'm not interested in any other scenarios, just because I think the status quo is fine with me. I'm glad Alderman Cannon mentioned the Big Belly, because I'm all about recycling and reusing and whatnot. And I was really interested when that debuted several years ago, and I guess I hadn't really even thought about how successful it has been or hasn't been. So I guess if you know something I don't know, I'd be interested maybe later on hearing it, or perhaps we could even get a staff report in terms of here's how many times we've emptied that, and if it wasn't, 2 emails a week that says I'm full. I remember that feature of that thing. Then I completely agree with you. It might have looked good when it debuted several years ago, but if it's not really serving a purpose, I agree, get rid of it.
Len, could I just clarify that?
One moment.
Yes,
okay.
I'm done. Thank you.
Mr. Banger. Mr. Cannon.
Can I just clarify that? I mean, Fred can jump in if he wants, but Fred pointed out something, if you remember, a year or two ago. Our guys, because of some of the things that are thrown in a lot of the waste containers along Kirchhoff. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Fred, I think they're picked up every 3 days, no matter what.
The two problems that we've had with the big bellies where we've used them along Kirchhoff Road is, number one, if they don't get enough use, the material that's in there, particularly when people put dog excrements and the like in there, is problematic. We've got to empty them before it signals us to do so. The second thing just is the volume. Some of them, such as the one here at City Hall, tend to get much more volume than some of our other locations do.
Can you tell me how often, like the one out in front, not that we need to know all the details, but does it get emptied once a week, twice a week, 3 times a
Barry
week?
might be able to tell you better than me.
It really depends on the week that we have because, again, it does send the signal what's going on. But I know that typically after farmers and food trucks, that Monday morning it is definitely taken care of. But typically once a week it is looked at. But it also depends on what else is going on. When we had a tour recently from Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, it was dumped the next day because it sent the signal that it was filled. So to give you a rough date, at least twice a week it's probably attended to. But the other thing is we're finding a lot more people during the summer are also stopping by to use the recycling. So they were either biking and they were done with their water bottle, they're throwing that in there. So the signals are being used. The one thing that I would also mention is that this year we moved one of the solar big bellies over to another location because it was getting higher volume there than where it was originally. So we do see that signal coming to us a little bit more often.
How many do we have that are actually tied up to the computer now? About? Even you don't know exactly, is it like 3, is it 10?
There's 4 in place.
There's 4 in place in the city of Rolling Meadows.
I guess it doesn't change my opinion, and I just think it's money we don't need to spend. I mean, I think our garbage guys do a great job, and they seem like they attend to things when they need to be done. It just seems to be a waste of $1,600 to me. That's an opinion. Thank you.
Other comments? Alderman Mujakis.
Thank you. I am in support of the chipper service as a pilot program. I've had enough residents in my ward approach me regarding, when are we bringing that back? Can we bring it back, please? So as far as a pilot program, I think we should go ahead with it and then reassess all the data on it and go from there to at least give us the opportunity to take care of those residents that are requesting this. And 30 cents is not a lot of money, so I don't think it's going to scare people away. As far as other rate increases with the refuse and stuff, other scenarios, I'm not interested in that, but at least the chipper program as a pilot, I would like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Gallo.
I'd like to dovetail off Alderman Majakis, but I'd like to apologize in advance for humoring me in the financial questions I'm about to ask. So the first, and it's a 2-part financial question. The first would be for probably the city financial manager.
Okay.
And that would be that we can perform basically interfund transfers or interdepartmental fund transfers of some sort at some point. But we did, and I'm going to repeat what I said at the last committee of the whole, that we did have a director of community development who has since left. And we were not going to go to the residents to ask for any additional funding to fund that salary for that position. We have another individual that will eventually take the place of a business advocate position, and that leaves a surplus, a differential surplus of funds available. So for at least this pilot year, how can we not perform an interfund transfer to take some of that surplus and put it toward refuse to cover this pilot?
It's actually 2 different years. Remember, this happened in 2017. We're talking 2018.
Correct.
And then when we budget for 2018, we've already made those estimate and changes because, again, in the 2018 budget, yes, there are changes, but again, then there's other increases in overall pieces. So you just can't say I'm taking a piece from over here and moving it over here because the overall budget continues to increase between the benefits and all the other pieces.
but had nothing changed from 2017 to 2018 with the removal of a director of economic development. We wouldn't have had to go to the residents to ask for an increase of funds of any kind, correct?
The council can also say that they don't want to do any increase, and that's their decision.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're saying is to stay within our parameters and what we feel comfortable with, and also making sure that the fund has additional revenue, is that 30-cent increase.
Because I just feel that from conversations with my ward and constituents, that's a significant surplus of money between the differentials in salaries from director of development to business advisor, that there should be money available for an interdepartmental fund transfer to cover a pilot program.
And again, like I said, you have to look at it as 2 different years. It's not the same year that we're doing it.
True.
And also you have to look budget to budget.
Okay.
So,
And then the second part, finance question to that, is the last time we spoke about chipper service, and the Fourth Ward is in favor of seeing the chipper service come back. However, I learned that there are essentially, and this is for Public Works, there are four areas or 4 regions that the chippers have the territory broken down into. And so just doing generic rudimentary math, that's essentially $10,000 per area and 4 weeks of time to perform that work. And then for me, to go back to the salary point for the Public Works Department, that would be essentially $65 an hour per employee, and there's 3 employees on staff to perform the chipper service at $10,000 a week for 10 hours a day.
so remember, there's
How do we break that
disposal,
down?
which is not an employee thing. So
Correct.
disposal is part of it. So when you actually look at the $40,000, how we've sort of calculated it into the budget, you have the salary, but plus then you have the disposal.
Right.
So it's 2 different parts. So you just can't say an employee is costing this amount for $10,000.
You're absolutely right. And the employee part, I'm not saying that is their entire salary, but that's factored, the ancillaries are factored into that rudimentary hourly wage. So I just want to see how it works at $10,000 a week.
I think that to go forward with that, it would probably be a staff meeting between Melissa and Barry. Gave a little leeway as we got there, but tonight we have to decide. There's several questions we want to go forward with, and you brought up something that needs more conversation with staff before us. So,
Okay.
Mr.
Thank you.
Manager.
Thank you. I realize there might be some folks who want to bring chipping back, and so I guess I'm a big fan of user fees. The people who actually use the service can pay for it. The city owns a chipper, so I would be open to the idea of setting aside a week or 2 during the fall for residents to sign up for the chipping service, as long as we establish a fee that they would pay for it. We've talked in council about, now that we haven't had it for several years, people might have gotten accustomed to getting their landscaper to take them, or just hiring a chipper to come and get them. So if we charged a user fee that would cover our own costs, I would be in support of that. I'm probably never going to support adding $40,000 to the refuse charges to cover what only a few people are going to be using. Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Greenbass.
Yes, I like what Alderman Banjer just said with respect to the chipper service. If someone wants it, you can pay for it. That's fine. I'm not in favor of raising the refuse by 30 cents.
Thank you. Do I have other comments other than, I don't know if it would be Melissa or Fred, before we try to call this for a vote, is there a logistics of, if we're going to go the user fee rate, just hypothetically, what does that do to staff?
We've only had limited experience with that in my tenure, which was when we were phasing it out several years ago. We offered it as a fee-based service. There, I don't think, but were maybe 30 or 40 people that used it, because when they heard what our minimum rate was, which I think was either $50 or $75 logistically to go to the site, chip up the brush. If they had a huge amount of brush, we would charge them or quote them a higher fee. So it'd be very difficult to answer as to the logistics of it to set up. We could certainly, it would probably be in our best interest, as I'm just thinking about it, to go down all the streets and chip what's there and then bill people later. But, whether you get paid for it or not versus the upfront cost is probably the single biggest difficulty. We can certainly look at it if the council is wanting us to kind of come up with some plan on doing it if it's fee-based. I'm certainly not against doing that, but there would be some challenges to it.
Thank you. Are there other comments, questions? What we were hoping to be just a simple process has become a little muddied waters here. I think Mr. Cannon's thought, I've always been in favor of the chipper, but I think what the first question we'll call, and that will sort of end what else we have to do is how many, under the scenario brought forth by staff, would be in favor of bringing the chipper back with the charge, the minimum charge as a pilot program. All those in,
I have one question before you ask that. If it's a pilot program and staff is going to track usage, what's the determining factor of whether it's successful or not? And if it's not successful, is the council going to lower the refuse rate the next year?
I believe the answer to that would be that we would have to have staff come back to us, number one, to give a report to council, and number two, this is a one-year pilot program, so at the end of the year, unless it's renewed, it would drop off. Correct, Mr. Comstock?
That is correct. Again, we would track it, we would have additional information, and for the 2019 budget, obviously you would see...
But how would we know if it's successful or not? I mean,
I think the biggest thing is we would be able to tell you how many residents or how many locations were actually utilizing the chipper program. So I know that sometimes people have said this number of residents have used it. Now we can give you fact-based numbers for the pilot program.
And what is our estimated fund balance for refuse if we don't put the money in and we do the chipper service? Are we going to go negative or will it stay positive?
You will still stay positive.
In the proposed working draft, we included the chipper, but we did not put a rate increase in. So you still have that 30% range, 33%. So you're in the fund balance range.
Okay.
It's just that going forward, when we're looking at estimates, we were saying that we're trying to cover costs. If it's the desire of council to have the chipper service, you probably want to cover as much cost as you can.
Okay, thank you.
Your question answers? Yes. Yes, Ms. Matakis.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you. I just like to emphasize that being that, like I said, I'm supporting a pilot program here. That's what I feel the key is to it, that it's a pilot program. So people have thrown out figures of only 15% of the residents would be interested, or most people have landscapers or whatever. I don't know. A lot of my residents I see out there cutting their own lawns and stuff. So being that it's a pilot program, as Barry stated, that would actually give us hard fact of how many are in need of it, because I think we're losing sight of the fact that there are a lot of residents out there that would really like it back, and let's give them the opportunity. And if it doesn't work and we're not getting the response we thought, then we don't continue the program. It's a one-time thing we're asking to do, to try. Thank you.
Mr. Cannon, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also would just like to remind the council that after our last discussion, it was also brought up by Mr. Vogt that if we do this work, we would have 4 weeks less of tree trimming, that we need to hire someone to do that work for us. And I'd like to remind people also that any trees or bushes that are cut up properly and left at the curb are picked up. I saw a guy the other day who had a huge tree all chopped up, left at the curb, and we pick them up right now with no extra fees, no extra service. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Any other? So going forward, once again, we're going to ask for a straw vote. It would be the increase that has been proposed as a pilot program. Staff would come back to council at the end of 1 year, give us their data, and it would be up to the council next year to continue the program. So all in favor of going ahead with the pilot program, please raise your hand.
I'm sorry, with an increase or without an increase?
I said basically what has been proposed by staff, the $3.60 for the year, correct, Mr. Comstock?
30 cents.
30 cents a month, correct, 30 cents a month, and that would be proposed as a trial program for 1 year, and for the program to begin and to run for a year, and for it to proceed after that, council would have to make the decision on that. Okay. So all in favor of going forward with a pilot program for 1 year with suggestion of staff, please raise your hand. We have 3 for, all against, 3 against. Yeah. So I guess we don't move forward. So at this time, we don't move forward, and we can bring it back to the council at a later date. Thank you, Mr. Comstock.
That brings us to number 4. Yes, Fred, you do need to stay.
Are we going to vote on the big belly things?
No, because that's part of the budget itself, so when we do the September budget, that's when you would make the motion to eliminate those things.
It's a line item that you can pull at that time.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Mr. Comstock?
Well, obviously, this is the last one for the committee of the whole discussion tonight. It's returned from our last committee of the meeting. It deals with local roads. Again, we're here to talk about, as you saw, even from the capital improvement program, this fund, and again, when you look at the overall fund, it will go negative next year because it doesn't have enough revenue. In the proposed budget that you will see, obviously released on the 22nd, there is a property tax increase because the reallocation has already been done. The line item on the property tax bill does significantly go up from the $550,000 to $900,000, but we're still short in revenue. So the other item that I do bring up is when we look at expenditures, please remember that there are 2 parts of roads. There's $600,000 coming out of MFT, and then there's the 1.2 coming out of the local roads. So again, we have still a $1.8 million program that we're still not really able to fund completely. So what has already been discussed in the past, when we had a $500,000 program, then we jumped up. What we're asking at this point in time and showing is that we need to do what we said we would gradually get back to that 1.8, because at this point in time, we're using reserves to either make that whole or deal with some other issues. So tonight, obviously, there's a few questions that we really need input from the city council as we continue moving down this way, but the input that we're really looking for are the same questions, just asked a little bit differently from last time. Do you still feel comfortable with a 1.8 program, other than, as I mentioned, we don't have enough revenue to do it? So again, the prudent thing would be, and staff would recommend, that we bring down the program and then try to make some additional cuts, or additional money would still be needed. The other part is the capital prioritization for this also needs to be looked at, and also, are there some projects that we can defer to outlaying years And then other items, is there still a revenue source that you would like to tap that we have not tapped that other municipalities have? And then obviously the other piece that we said, at this point in time in the proposed budget, there is an increase, and a large part of that increase is significant to the roads. But again, if you don't feel comfortable with that increase that we have right now, does the council want to take another increase in the property tax higher than what staff is recommending? And again, that would all go back to the levy for local roads. So that's my snapshot of the estimate of where we are. We do talk about all the pieces. With that, I do turn that over to Finance Director Melissa Gallagher and obviously Public Works Director Fred Vogt, because again, we've given you the draft working items on this, and you can actually see some of the other items in some of the projects that we are actually talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Crumstock. I'm just going to add just a couple different items. I think Mr. Crumstock really gave a great scenario in terms of all the talking points that we have in City Council direction. One of the things that we just accomplished through the bond discussion is to run scenarios. So we really kind of covered the point number one in terms of the City Council input and direction. At the same point, throwing it back to City Council for further discussion is looking as far as the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee recommendation of $1.8 million. Are you comfortable with looking at that, or as staff is saying, is to maybe gradually bring that to the 1.8 or farther down the road? But at this point, we were more comfortable just on the estimates right now, but a $1 million, $1 million annual street program, and that's between both funds of state MFT and local road. That's the first piece, and I think, as Mr. Crumstock has mentioned, there's some reprioritization deferrals that we could look at as well. That's something staff could do through the budget process. And this is just the first look at things, too. So obviously, the proposed budget is going to be delivered pretty soon, and we'll be able to discuss this through the next couple months. But we'll need some direction in terms of thoughts and ideas.
Thank you, Melissa. And I'm sure Fred Vogt for a moment thought he heard $100 million for roads and jumped up and down. So
We'll get right on that.
yes, he would be calling the contractors now. Trying to put this in a queue to make it a little bit easier. We'll start off with, because part of it is what we're going to discuss tonight goes back to what the scenarios that you spoke about with bonds. So we're not, staff is not asking for a dollar amount tonight. What they're asking is for direction. So I will open it to the floor to discussion. The first point is, are we looking at 1.5 or 1.0 million for this? And because staff is just giving us the information, we're directing staff, and the council will make the policy on where the revenue will come from. So I will open it for the first question, keeping it to what's in the budget or the staff recommendation of $1 million. So let's start with that. Mr. Manager.
Thank you. My comments are actually going to touch on all these questions here. In my opinion, I'm not comfortable. I'm fine when we start exploring the bonds, getting information about, hey, we're going to top off this big amount with another $1 million that we can use to be more flexible with our streets program. But I'm not comfortable relying on bonds for our streets program. I think we should be doing that from revenues from these different sources. We had talked about streets several weeks ago, and I'd said then, and I still believe that it is very gratifying and has been gratifying these past several years to go big, and we have. We've had unexpected windfalls that we have directed to be spent on more streets. Our bids have come in lower than expected, and we've gotten some additional cul-de-sacs resurfaced And that has all been very gratifying, and the residents love that. I love that, seeing actual things being put on the ground. That's our tax money at work. If we went big in years past, it may have been because we got those unexpected windfalls. And if we're not, and we can't plan on getting those, I would suggest we scale back our street program to $1 million. We're still not there, as staff has reminded us. So then I would say let's absorb it, the shortfall in the general fund. If we want to go big, if we want to go more than $1 million, I would say let's pay for it through an increase in the tax levy. So if staff had increased that tax levy to almost get to our $1 million level, either increase it by $100,000 to get to that $1 million level, or increase it by another $400,000 or $500,000 to get to 1.3, 1.4. 1.8, in my opinion, I know we did this last year, but there's nothing that says we have to mirror last year's improvements this year. And I would say, just from a standpoint of, we've got lots of other capital improvements staring at us in the very near future. I would say let's pull back our ambitious street plans to something between $1 million and $1.5 million, and only with an increase in that tax levy. So that basically covers all my thoughts on all these questions. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Banjo, I want to thank you all four at one time. Huh?
Yeah.
Good job. Alderman Majakis.
Thank you. Alderman Banjer and I were in agreement last time too about the saying about that 1 million. I would love to spend 1.8 million also on roads again. I don't see that being the smart move at this point. When looking this over, and I see, that staff even says that there are a few projects that are possible can be deferred to outlying years. I would like to know what those were and what those, where that savings will come and what that can add to the road projects. I am not in favor of an increase in the property tax levy. I had people cringe when they saw their second half property tax bills that were only supposed to be 45%, which they are, but some of them really skyrocketed. So we're not talking a small increase. I don't think it would be in their property taxes. So I would be more in that $1 million mark, like we said before. But I would like to know what projects they could reprioritize, and see which ones can be deferred at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Jenkins. Does anyone else have comments? Okay. Well, for the first part, because we will go down through this, and again, we're asking staff for the scenario that, because part of this will come through the bonds, a straw vote of going forward with just $1 million in road improvement for the coming year.
I have a question.
Are you going to give us different levels? Or is
Well, I thought we'd start off with $1 million, because then the next is, if that goes forward, great, because then I'm going to ask how many would like to go further if $1 million is not something that...
Great, thanks,
Okay.
thanks for the explanation.
Yes.
If I'm reading this right, it says $1 million and to add a bond issuance component. So is that what the question is?
Well, what Alderman, I think Banjer and Majakis brought up is we're just going to do it with $1 million, just what we have this year in property taxes. Then the next question will be, what other scenarios would the city council like to see? So in other words, they talked about having a bond issue coming forward, okay, different scenarios. So do we go staying with the $1 million for the property tax, keeping the property tax level what it is and going forward with those roads? The next question after that will be, what other scenario would you like to build on top of that? Okay. And that would be through bonds.
Well, what happened to 1.5, 1.8?
Well, we'll bring that up next. First, we're starting out with 1 point, so Mr. Beanbaugh.
So the first, can you clarify that again?
Okay.
So we're voting on
The
1
first
million.
question is, staff feels comfortable with us just doing $1 million and keeping the tax levy at 4.8, correct, Mr. Comstock?
That is correct.
That's the first question, we're calling. So, how many people are on the staff would give, on the council would give staff direction to keep it at 4.8 and a $1 million levy for roads? Please raise your hand.
And we can vote for more than one, correct?
Yes. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 5 out of 6. Okay, the next question is, we know that we have that. What other, I'll open it to the council, what other scenario would you like to recommend on top of that? Mr. Diastis, I gather you brought up the question.
Lead meeting. I mean, I don't know. What's the next question?
Well, the next question is, they brought up a scenario of bonds that they would like to, they could come forward with. And
So the question then
It
is
is
$1 million plus
a scenario
to add
another
a bond
additional
issuance.
$3 to $5 million to come back with that scenario for roads.
So that's the next question.
That's the next question,
Okay.
correct. So then that would be going back, and staff would come back with what it would cost for the city. So how many would go with that scenario too, on top of what we just did? Raise your hand. We have 3 against. 3. Okay. Any other questions? Tie. So presently, the direction on the first is we're going forward with $1 million based on
The 4.8.
Yeah, 4.8, correct.
Plus bonds.
Pardon?
Plus bonds.
No.
No.
No,
the bonds
Bonds
failed.
were 3.3, so we're
Thank
not
you.
going forward with that, so. Now, the next question that comes up is, what would council like to see staff do or come back with a program of prioritization of capital projects?
Just
Right.
clarifying, you mean that, like, which ones they would defer?
Yes, which ones could they defer and which ones would they go forward? Because tonight, we're giving them information and this will come back to us. Yes, go ahead.
Could I ask a question? I thought
Sure.
you asked also for other scenarios other than just the 2 you talked about. Can we still talk about that, or is that gone?
Well, I was going to combine that with, we could go to other scenarios, but there's other items. I think the 2 and 3 come back together in the regard to the other scenarios would be, how do we want staff to come back to prioritize what they have? I mean, we have the scenario, we've directed, council's directed staff to keep it at 4.8, and council did not agree on coming up with issuing more bond money for roads.
But there are other scenarios we might be able to come up with.
Well, I'll open it up. What suggestion do you have, Mr. Cannon?
Well, I got a couple, I guess I would just
Okay,
ask.
right.
Don't we have to vote on the last one you just said, though?
On which one, the prior, we voted the bonds down, and I was about to come forward with the capital prior.
Right. Are we going to vote on that
So
one?
we're still on B, I guess, is what?
2.
2, we're on 2.
Oh,
And then when we come back to,
He's on this.
yeah, we can come back under other items
Back to number 5.
great. That's
and do it that way. So, staff.
Go ahead.
Good. I just, show of hands, asking staff to prioritize what we have and what, if there are other projects that we could defer and use that money to go into the road fund. So in other words, after they reprioritize, is there other money that could be saved to go into the road fund? Is that, Mr. Cannon?
Well, there's other things that I'd like to bring up that are not,
Okay.
that might affect what money we have.
Okay, you know what? I will back off of this for a moment. Go ahead, Mr. Cannon.
Okay, I just, one of the things that I always get confused about is we talk about trying to increase money, but we never offer any suggestions on how we might be able to do that, other than just a straight tax. I guess two things that I would offer, I've offered in the past. I think everybody in town benefits from our roads. I would suggest to increase our vehicle stickers. And I know some people don't like that thought, but contrary to what we're told, I actually did a little investigating this the last week or so, and there's towns to the east of us that charge a lot more for vehicle stickers than we do. I know there's some that don't. Some have been included into their taxes, but it is a way for people who actually use our roads to pay more. No one likes that thought. I understand that, but it's a direct benefit for what we use the roads for. We use cars, we get vehicle stickers. It's part of the program. I guess the other one I would ask is ask us to reconsider video gaming, and all the revenue from that go into road construction forever. So they're just two scenarios, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments on Mr. Cannon's suggestions there? Yes, Mr. Banger.
Thank you. 100% of the people I talk to say they have met their pain threshold with vehicle sticker prices, so I would support that. When gambling came back up in front of the council, I want to say our bottom line revenue number was $40,000, and I would just suggest that since we're dealing with several hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're trying to come up with here, number one, I'm not in favor of gambling, obviously, the 2 times it's been in front of council, but number two, I would say that's just not enough for me to consider it useful for this discussion. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Bemis.
Yeah, I'm not in favor of raising the vehicle sticker prices.
Okay.
And I'm not in favor of the gambling either. And I'd like to get back to the vote about finding the reprioritizing
Okay.
when you have a chance.
Okay, will do. Thank you. Any other comments? Well, we were looking for alternatives. All those who'd be in favor of raising vehicle stickers, raise your hand. 5 to 1 no. All those in favor of using video gambling as a way to finance our roads, raise your hands. And that's 4 to 2. And getting back to capital projects, giving staff direction to come back with a plan to council on reprioritizing capital improvement plan, their capital improvement plan, and any savings would be directed towards the roads. Can any discussion on that? Do we have a show of hands of those who would like to go forward with that idea? That's unanimous. Thank you. Third item up here is other communities have done alternative revenue sources, such as natural gas tax. Would the city council like to see some data, like in the past, on what communities have this revenue source and some basic parameters for this revenue source? Any discussion on that one? Yes.
Every year that comes up, every year I say no, and I'm not going to change my mind this year.
Okay. So, can we have a show of hands who would like to go, unless there's any other questions, who would like to go forward with natural gas tax? Opposed? That was unanimous. We have the tax levy. Does the city council view this increase? We basically asked and answered that in the beginning, is the 4.8% property tax is what we're keeping to go to $1 million in roads for the year.
The 4.8 brings up the tax levy to $900,000 in this line item.
Correct, and there'll be more on this when the budget is presented. So.
Yeah, the working draft of the property tax levy is actually in the packet, but it does reallocate, obviously, between the pensions and all the other pieces, but the 4.8 is what you will see in the proposed budget.
So in other words, if someone would like to come forward and...
To increase it, they would have to make the motion to increase it.
So, does anyone wish to come forward to have direct staff to increase the tax levy for the coming year? Any discussion? Raise your hand if you'd like to direct staff to raise the tax levy for next year.
Oh, we voted on it already.
No, we brought it up again, so I
It was
just,
just up again second time.
yes.
If you want to increase it, the 1 million and the 4.8 was the other one. This
Right.
is if you want to take 4.8 up.
So if you want to go above that. So I see no. Are there any other ideas or suggestions for evaluation to staff tonight? Seeing none, Mr. Comstock,
There is a request for
we're going into
closed
closed
session.
session. There is a request to go into closed session for the item listed above, land acquisition 5, Illinois 122, C5, the Illinois Open Meeting Act. It does require a motion, a formal roll call. Is there such a motion? Mr. Banger's made it. Mr. Veenbos is second. The clerk will please call the roll.
Cannon?
Yes.
Majikis?
Yes.
Gallo?
Yes.
Baner?
Yes.
Diastis?
Yes.
Veenbos?
With 6 approved and none opposed, we will now go into closed session. The audience and the press are advised that the council does not anticipate taking any action upon turning to open session.